History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth. Excerpts. Of Vortigern and his fate. The Romans have left Britain and taken their army with them. Lacking both strong leadership and fighting men, their enemies are soon at the gates, and chaos ensues, until Constantine is crowned king and restores order to the realm. But after 10 years on the throne, he is assassinated, with his sons mere boys and the oldest given to the church. There is no clear heir to the throne. Some want to crown the second son, Aurelius Ambrosius. Others favor the youngest, Uther Pendragon. The nobleman Vortigern, however, takes the matter into his own hands, and crowns the eldest, Constans, as king. Having the young king under his thumb, Vortigern consolidates his power, before he has the king assassinated. The king's brothers are taken to safety in Lesser Britain by their guardians, leaving the path clear for Vortigern to take the crown for himself. The enemies of Britain are yet again at the gates when the Saxons arrive from Germany. Hengist, the leader of the Saxons, befriend Vortigern and offer the services of his skilled warriors. Proving themselves decisive in winning the war, Hengist and the Saxons grow in favor and prominence, and Vortigern marries Hengist's beautiful daughter, Rowan. At last, ethnic and religious conflict boils over in rebellion, and Vortimer, eldest son of Vortigern by his first wife, leads the Britons against the Saxons. Winning the battle and driving the Saxons back to Germany, Vortimer is crowned king in place of his father. But not all of the Saxons had left. Rowan had stayed at the side of her husband, Vortigern, and as revenge, she poisoned her stepson, Vortimer, leading to his death. And this is where our story begins. Book 6, Chapter 15. Vortigern, after the death of his son, was again restored to the kingdom, and at the request of his wife sent messengers into Germany to Hengist with an invitation to return into Britain, but privately and with a small retinue to prevent a quarrel between the barbarians and his subjects. But Hengist, hearing that Vortimer was dead, raised an army of no less than 300,000 men, and fitting out a fleet returned with them to Britain. When Vortigern and the nobility heard of the arrival of so vast a multitude, they were immoderately incensed, and after consultation together, resolved to fight them and drive them from their coasts. Hengist, being informed of their design by messengers sent from his daughter, immediately entered into deliberation what course to pursue against them. After several stratagems had been considered, he judged it most feasible to impose upon the nation by making show of peace. With this view he sent ambassadors to the king to declare to him that he had not brought so great a number of men for the purpose of either staying with him or offering any violence to the country. But the reason why he brought them was because he thought Vortimer was yet living and that they should have occasion for them against him in case of an assault. But now, since he was no longer doubted of his being dead, he submitted himself and his people to the disposal of Vortigern, so that he might retain as many of them as he should think fit, and whomever he rejected, Hengist would allow to return back without delay to Germany. And if these terms pleased Vortigern, he desired him to appoint a time and place for their meeting, and adjusting matters according to his pleasure. When these things were represented to the king, he was mightily pleased, as being very unwilling to part with Hengist, and at last ordered his subjects and the Saxons to meet upon the calends of May, which were now very near, at the monastery of Ambrius for the settling of the matters above mentioned. The appointment being agreed to on both sides, Hengist, with a new design of villainy in his head, ordered his soldiers to carry every one of them a long dagger under their garments, and while the conference should be held with the Britons, who would have no suspicion of them, he would give them this word of command: Nemet ura Saxas. at which moment they were all to be ready to seize boldly every one his next man, and with his drawn dagger stab him. Accordingly, when they all met at the time and place appointed, and began to treat of peace, and when a fit of opportunity offered for executing his villainy, Hengist cried out, "Nemet ura saxas!" and at the same instant seized Vortigern and held him by his cloak. The Saxons, upon the signal given, drew their daggers, and falling upon the princes, who little suspected any such design, assassinated them to the number of 460 barons and consuls, to whose bodies St. Eldad afterward gave Christian burial not far from Caradoc, now Salisbury, in a burying place near the monastery of Ambrius, the abbot who was the founder of it. For they all came without arms, having no thought of anything but treating of peace, which gave the others a fairer opportunity of exercising their villainous design against them. But the pagans did not escape unpunished while they acted this wickedness, a great number of them being killed during the massacre of their enemies. For the Britons, taking up clubs and stones from the ground, resolutely defended themselves, and did good execution upon the traitors. Chapter 16. There was present one Eldol, consult of Gloucester, who at the sight of this treachery took up a stake which he happened to find, and with that made his defence. Every blow he gave carried death along with it, and by breaking either the head, arms, shoulder or legs of a great many, he struck no small terror into the traitors, nor did he move from the spot before he had killed with that weapon 70 men. But being no longer able to stand his ground against such a number, he made his escape from them and retired to his own city. Many fell on both sides, but the Saxons got the victory, because the Britons, having no suspicion of treachery, came unarmed and therefore made a weaker defence. After the commission of this detestable villainy, the Saxons would not kill Vortigern, but having threatened him with death and bound him, demanded his cities and fortified places in consideration of their granting him his life. He, to secure himself, denied them nothing, and when they made him confirm his grounds with an oath, they released him from his chains and then marched first to London, which they took, as they did afterwards York, Lincoln and Winchester, wasting the countries through which they passed and destroying the people, as wolves do sheep when left by their shepherds. When Vortigern saw the desolation which they made, he retired into parts of Cambria, not knowing what to do against so barbarous a people. Chapter 17. At last he had recourse to magicians for their advice, and commanded them to tell him what course to take. They advised him to build a very strong tower for his own safety, since he had lost all his other fortified places. Accordingly, he made a progress about the country to find a convenient situation, and came at last to Mount Arir, where he assembled workmen from several countries and ordered them to build the tower. The builders, therefore, began to lay the foundation, but whatever they did one day, the earth swallowed up the next, so as to leave no appearance of their work. Vortigern, being informed of this, again consulted with his magicians concerning the cause of it, who told him that he must find out a youth that had never had a father, and kill him, and then sprinkle the stones and cement with his blood, for by those means, they said, he would have a firm foundation. Hereupon messengers were dispatched away all over the provinces to inquire out such a man. In their travels, they came to a city called afterwards Merlin, where they saw some young men playing before the gate, and went up to them. But being weary with their journey, they sat down in the ring to see if they could meet with what they were in quest of. Towards evening, there happened on a sudden a quarrel between two of the young men, whose names were Merlin and Dabutius. In the dispute, Dabutius said to Merlin, "You fool! You presume to quarrel with me? Is there any equity in our birth? I am descended of a royal race, both on my father and mother's side. As for you, Nobody knows what you are, for you have never had a father." At the words, the messengers looked earnestly upon Merlin and asked the bystander who he was. They told him it was not known who was his father, but that his mother was the daughter of the king of Demetia, and that she lived in St. Peter's Church among the nuns of that city. Chapter 18. Upon this the messengers hastened to the governor of the city, and ordered him in the king's name to send Merlin and his mother to the king. As soon as the governor understood the occasion of their message, he readily obeyed the order, and sent them to Vortigern to complete his design. When they were introduced into the king's presence, he received the mother in a very respectful manner on account of her noble birth, and began to inquire of her by what man she had conceived. "My sovereign lord," said she, "by the life of your soul and mine, I know nobody that begot him of me. Only this I know, that I was once with my companions in our chambers. There appeared to me a person in the shape of a most beautiful young man, who often embraced me eagerly in his arms and kissed me. And when he had stayed a little time, he suddenly vanished out of my sight. But many times after this, he would talk with me when I sat alone, without making any visible appearance. When he had a long time haunted me in this manner, he at last lay with me several times in the shape of a man, and left me with child. And I do affirm to you, my sovereign lord, that excepting that young man, I know nobody that begot him of me." The king, full of admiration at this account, ordered Morgantius to be called, that he might satisfy him as to the possibility of what the woman had related. Morgantius, being introduced and having the whole matter repeated to him, said to Vortigern, "In the books of our philosophers, and in great many histories, I have found that several men have bad like original. For as Apuleius informs us in his book concerning the demon of Socrates, between the moon and the earth inhabit those spirits, which we will call incubuses. These are of the nature partly of men and partly of angels, and whenever they please assume human shapes and lie with women. Perhaps one of them appeared to this woman and begot that young man of her." Chapter 19. Merlin in the meantime was attentive to all that had passed, and then approached the king and said to him, "For what reason am I and my mother introduced into your presence?" "My magicians," answered Vortigern, "advised me to seek out a man that had no father, with whose blood my building is to be sprinkled in order to make it stand." "Order your magicians," said Merlin, "to come before me, and I will convict them of a lie." The king was surprised at his words, and presently ordered the magicians to come and sit down before Merlin, who spoke to them after this manner. "Because you are ignorant of what it is that hinders the foundation of the tower, you have recommended that the shedding of my blood for cement to it, as if that would presently make it stand. But tell me now, what is there under the foundation? For something there is that will not suffer it to stand." The magicians at this began to be afraid and made no answer. Then said Merlin, who was also called Ambrose, "I entreat your majesty would command your workmen to dig into the foundation, and you will find a pond which causes the foundation to sink." This accordingly was done, and then presently they found a pond deep underground, which had made it give way. Merlin after this went again to the magicians and said, "Tell me, ye false sycophants, what is there under the pond?" But they were silent. Then said he again to the king, "Command the pond to be drained, and at the bottom you will see 2 hollow stones, and in them 2 dragons asleep." The king made no scruple of believing him, since he had found true what he said of the pond, and therefore ordered it to be drained. Which done, he found as Merlin had said, and now was possessed with the greatest admiration of him. Nor were the rest that were present less amazed by his wisdom, thinking it to be no less than divine inspiration. Book 7. Chapter 3. As Vortigern, king of the Britons, was sitting upon the bank of the drained pond, the 2 dragons, one of which was white, the other red, came forth, and approaching one another, began a terrible fight, and cast forth fire with their breath. But the white dragon had the advantage, and made the other fly to the end of the lake. And he, for grief at his flight, renewed the assault upon his pursuer and forced him to retire. Book 8, Chapter 1. Merlin, by delivering these and many other prophecies, caused in all that were present an admiration at the ambiguity of his expressions. But Vortigern, above all the rest, both admired and applauded the wisdom and prophetical spirit of the young man, for that age had produced none that ever talked in such a manner before him. Being therefore curious to learn his own fate, he desired the young man to tell him what he knew concerning that particular. Merlin answered, "Fly the fire of the sons of Constantine, if you are able to do it. Already they are fitting out their ships. Already they are leaving the Arhturian shore. Already they are spreading out their sails to the wind. They will steer towards Britain. They will invade the Saxon nation. They will subdue that wicked people. But they will first burn you being shut up in a tower. To your own ruin did you prove a traitor to their father, and invite the Saxons into the island. You invited them for your safeguard, but they came for a punishment to you. 2 deaths instantly threaten you, nor is it easy to determine which you can best avoid. For on the one hand the Saxons shall lay waste to your country, and endeavour to kill you. On the other shall arrive the 2 brothers, Aurelius Ambrosius and Uther Pendragon, whose business will be to revenge their father's murder upon you. Seek out some refuge if you can. Tomorrow they will be on the shore of Totnes. The faces of the Saxons shall look red with blood, Hengist shall be killed, and Aurelius Ambrosius shall be crowned. He shall bring peace to the nation, he shall restore the churches, but shall die of poison. His brother Uther Pendragon shall succeed him, whose days also shall be cut short by poison. There shall be present at the commission of this treason your own issue, whom the boar of Cornwall shall devour." Accordingly, the next day arrived Aurelius Ambrosius and his brother with 10,000 men. Chapter 2. As soon as the news of his coming was divulged, the Britons, who had been dispersed by the great calamities, met together from all parts, and gaining this new accession of strength from their countrymen, displayed unusual vigour. Having assembled together the clergy, they anointed Aurelius king and paid him the customary homage. And when the people were urgent to fall upon the Saxons, he dissuaded them from it, because his desire was to pursue Vortigern first. For the treason committed against his father so very much affected him that he thought nothing done till that was first avenged. In pursuance, therefore, of this design, he marched with his army into Cambria to the town of General, whither Vortigern had fled for refuge. That town was in the country of Hyrgin, upon the river Gania, in the mountain called Cloarius. As soon as Ambrosius was arrived there, bearing in mind the murder of his father and brother, he spake thus to Eldol, Duke of Gloucester: "See, most noble Duke, whether the walls of this city are able to protect Vortigern against my sheathing this sword in his bowels. He deserves to die, and you cannot, I suppose, be ignorant of his desert. O most villainous of men, whose crime deserve inexpressible tortures! First he betrayed my father Constantine, who had delivered him and his country from the inroads of the Picts. Afterwards, my brother Constans, whom he made king on purpose to destroy him. Again, when his craft had usurped the crown, he introduced pagans among the natives, in order to abuse those who continued steadfast in their loyalty to me. But by the good providence of God, he unwaringly fell into the snare which he had laid for my faithful subjects. For the Saxons, when they found him out in his wickedness, drove him from the kingdom, for which nobody ought to be concerned. But this I think matter of just grief, that this odious people, whom that detestable traitor invited over, has expelled the nobility, laid waste to a fruitful country, destroyed the holy churches, and almost extinguished Christianity over the whole kingdom. Now, therefore, my countrymen, show yourselves men. First revenge yourself upon him that was the occasion of all these disasters. Then let us turn our arms against our enemies, and free our country from their brutish tyranny." Immediately, therefore, they set their engines to work and labor to beat down the walls. But at last, when all other attempts failed, they had recourse to fire, which meeting with proper fuel, ceased not to rage till it had burned down the tower and Vortigern in it. This was not the end of the adventures of Ambrosius Aurelius. They are just begun. But that is a story for another day.